All right, how's it going, y'all? So today, I'm going to be going over how to use a Synology NAS with Lightroom for photographers. So this is going to be part one of a multi-part series where I'm really going to be diving into how photographers can use a NAS for their workflows, specifically really being able to do two things primarily. Well, I guess three. One, actually store your raw files. So this is where you actually get to store all that massive space. You can have all of your raw files on one space rather than scattered about 50 external hard drives like a lot of photographers I know have. Two, actually be able to keep track of the exported photos. So that's even like sharing with clients or just also, hey, when you export something out of Lightroom, you clearly liked it, be able to keep it and very easily see it. I know you can always go into Lightroom, but how often do you actually do that? And three, be able to back up your raw files and your photos in general. And so those three things are really going to be the basis of this series, is just focusing on how we can do those three things, because at its core, that is going to be the three things you really need to do as a photographer when it comes to space. And so it's going to be using a Synology NAS. I've got tons of tutorials on them. And funny enough, the way I got into Synology the very first time, and which has spawned all this channel and everything, is I actually bought one of these in college, a much smaller version, to store all my raw files. Because I found, I need a place to keep track of all of it that I can access from anywhere. And this was it. By the way, if you want to hire me for consulting, I now do this professionally and it's my full-time job. There's a link for that in the description. And so in this tutorial, I'm going to be going over Lightroom and macOS, but it's going to be the exact same thing. I'm going to add the appropriate links for Windows. And also, if you're using something like Capture One, the steps are pretty much identical. It's just use the Capture One equivalent of a Lightroom catalog, which is pretty darn easy to do. And overall, the workflow is going to be pretty much identical. And so this is going to be part one. And so as I build these videos, there's going to be a playlist down there so you can actually go to the specific one you want. But this one's really going to be getting started and the basics. I'm not really going to be going over which NAS to buy. I'll leave a couple links down in the description below to kind of just get you started with how much storage you're planning on using. And my quick recommendation would be, when you're buying a NAS, buy it and only populate half the bays of storage. So if you have a 4-bay NAS, basically buy enough hard drive space for 2 bays. And so that way, as your library grows and as you have more and more photos and you realize, I want to start doing video, or you have a 100 megapixel camera that comes out, who knows, you have some space to grow and it doesn't just instantaneously become e-waste and you have to upgrade. It's absolutely worth it to spend a couple extra $100 up front, because then you don't have to spend a lot more money later on just because you realize, that only lasted me 2 or 3 years. These things can pretty easily last you probably 7 years in general, as long as you have enough space. All right, and so now with all that out of the way, what this tutorial is going to be is we are going to be starting with the overall Lightroom workflow with a Synology NAS. So we're going to go from setting up a shared drive all the way into moving your existing Lightroom catalog wherever it is, however it's scattered about, into the NAS and being able to edit off of it. It's mostly going to be focused on keeping all the files on the NAS, but we'll also go over a quick overview on how you can keep your current files on your laptop. And so that way, when you're editing new files, it's pretty quick because you don't have to deal with the slowdown of a network drive. And this is going to be a setup where your Lightroom catalog either lives on the local SSD or something like this, an external hard drive like a lot of people have. And so I also do already have parts 2 and 3 planned out for this. So part 2 is going to be how to use Synology Photos and Synology Drive to both see all of your exported files very easily and very nicely, as well as be able to actually share them with clients. It's a bit of a specific workflow you need to work with, and so that's why I'm going to spend that video going over it. And then part 3 is going to be how you can access all of your raw files from a massive catalog anywhere in the world. So as long as you have your actual .lrc catalog, you'll be able to export any one of your files at full resolution, albeit just a little bit slower, especially if you have a low internet connection. And so those are going to be parts 2 and 3. If you have any other recommendations, please put them down in the description below. All right, so the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do is get this thing set up. And we're going to assume that you pretty much followed my getting started guide. I will go ahead and leave a link to that in the description below. And you pretty much just got the NAS working, and that is where we're going to go ahead and start. All right, so now all that we really need to do before setting this up is just the very basics. And I'm going to assume that you have started out and you've got a Lightroom catalog. Right now it's on the external SSD. And who knows where all your raw files are scattered about. This process will allow us to go in and reorganize them essentially. It's a great time to get everything set up nicely. I would highly recommend importing by year, month, day, just because it keeps everything so much more organized. And then for any specific ventures you want to go down, you can always just create a specific collection for that. So right here, I've got the catalog, and we are going to go through the process. So the very first thing you want to go ahead and do is log into your Synology DSM. You can use your Quick Connect for that or however you connect it in. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new shared folder to keep everything nicely organized. So we're going to go into Control Panel, Shared Folder, Create, and create a shared folder. And this one is going to just be called Photography. That's what I name it. It's up to you whatever you want to name it, but don't name it Photo. That's the only thing. It's going to be Photography. You could also call it Lightroom. Anything that makes sense to you, I'm going to leave it as Photography. And we're going to have the recycling bin enabled, but we're not going to restrict it to administrators only. I'm going to skip through a couple of these because we don't need to do encryption on it. These are our photos. We don't really want that. I will recommend enabling the checksum if you have the ability to. And finally, just give any users access to it, just like you normally would. Pretty basic, just say, hey, anybody who wants access to this, read write. So now this is what we're going to be using to actually store all of our photos. Now we're going to want to map this as a network drive if you're using Windows, or macOS, just connect to it. And so I'll leave a link to how to do that in Windows, and it's going to be pretty straightforward. So in macOS, we're just going to go over to Finder, find it in the left-hand corner, and double click on Photography. The other option is if you don't see it, you can go into Network, just Google how to connect to Synology SMB via whatever operating system you're using. So I'm just going to click on Photography here, and I've got it set up where automatically on the right hand side mounts it. So that is perfect. One additional thing we're going to want to do here is we're going to want to add snapshots. I'm going to do that very quickly. I'm just going to blast through this. If you followed my getting started guide for this, you will have already learned how to set up snapshots and they will be installed. I'm just going to go ahead and do it right now, just because it's a thing you want to do every time you create a new shared folder. You want to enable snapshots on there. So just blasting through this, going to just add snapshots to this. And there's a weird UI glitch, so that's fun. Keep all snapshots for 4 days is fine, and then dailies for 30 days probably makes sense to you. For photography, really the only thing this is going to affect is from the moment you delete a file to the moment your space back will be 30 days. So I've covered that in a ton of different videos. Just go ahead, enable snapshots on that. And that's pretty much the last thing that I'm just going to blow through. The rest of this is going to be very Lightroom specific. So now we can see I've got the snapshot folder there. Perfect. All right. So now we have this photography folder right here, and that is what we're going to start up. And now we're going to go ahead and get organized in here first. So I'm going to create a folder in here called raw files. Great place to start is having a folder for your raw files and a folder for Lightroom backup. That's just a general good place to start for this, is to have those two folders there, because that's what we're really going to start with. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and plug in my catalog and we're going to look at it. So if we double click and open it up, we're going to see that this is my catalog. It's actually pretty basic. I'm just going to open it on up, and in this Lightroom folder right there, that's where all my raw files are stored. So I have a very, very, very basic setup over here where I just created this for a demo, but you can see right here, this is my folder. And what I'm going to want to do just to get this really well cleaned up is I want to move every single major folder from right here into this folder right here, these raw files right there. That way, everything's nice and organized on the NAS. What I would highly recommend doing, as you can see here, I import by year, month, day. And so that way you can keep it extra clean, and you can do things like keep the current year on your local computer for the fastest speeds, and then keep all other years older on the actual NAS. But right here, we've got it all set up in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, through macOS Finder or Windows File Explorer, I'm actually going to copy all of these over manually. So The reason I like to do this is because we're going to be organizing it ourselves. And so it's very useful to kind of copy everything over, and then we're going to update folder location. It's a great idea before we do this to also take a backup of your catalog. So you can just go into catalog settings, backup catalog when Lightroom next exits, close out of it, and back it up. That way, if anything you do, nothing here is going to be destructive. It's all just going to be, hey, whenever you get a chance, do it kind of a thing, rather than actually destroying the catalog. If anything happens, you can just go back into the backups. So all of my raw files, if we open up Lightroom right here, we can see that they're all stored under this external drive and a folder called Lightroom. So what I'm going to want to do is to keep this nice and organized is I'm just going to copy over the folder 2019. So this right here is the external drive that used to be mine. I'm going to go in Lightroom, and this right here are my 2019 raw files. I've kept these organized, but what you can do is however many folders you have and however you want to organize it going ahead, you can just copy them on in. So I'm just going to copy them to the raw files, and that way we've got 2019 right there. So as you can see right now, I'm over Wi-Fi, and so it will be slow. I would highly recommend, especially for this part, buy a Ethernet cable and plug it directly into your computer, and you will get much faster speeds. So instead of actually waiting for this to finish, I'm just going to copy it over a faster way, because before this, I actually copied it over with a 10 gig network over here. So I'm just going to pretend like we finished this copy. All right, and so now, because of the power of movie magic, it's been copied over instantly. So as you can tell, this is a very simplified setup. I only have the one folder, but this will work with however many folders you've got. It's a really good idea now to figure out the organizational system you want to use. And it might not be worth it for you to go back and change every old one, but what you could do is, say you've got a bunch of old random stuff. You could say old, and just copy all those random folders you've got that are really disorganized, and there's one from your trip, and just throw that all in here. And then going forward, you can use the year, month, day method. And that way you just keep it nice and organized where it's easy to find out where all your raw files are. And then you use specific collections in Lightroom to actually manage the different groups. I think that's the best method. And by doing the old folder method where you just throw everything in old that's disorganized, it gives you a very nice and clean Lightroom raw file collection. And it makes it very easy to see. And that way going forward, you're going to be set up well. It's not a bad idea right now to spend the time to figure out organizing your catalog. And there are also ways to actually import one catalog to another, and you can mess with those. And that way, some of them will also copy over the raw files properly. I'm not going to go over that here, but you can look up those tutorials, and it might be a good time to do that and clean everything on up and just kind of get a new workflow. All right, so now we are all set up. We have got all of our actual raw files stored on the server. And so now what we're going to be able to do is go in and actually start updating our Lightroom catalog. So right now, our Lightroom catalog is looking at this external hard drive right here for all of our raw files. And you may have multiple of these right here. You just want to make sure all of these folders, all the data at least in them, is moved on over to the NAS. And so now what we can do is we can do a process called update folder location. And so this is us telling Lightroom, hey, I've moved this. Don't look at it on the hard drive anymore. Now look at it on the NAS. For Windows users, this is also going to work because you are going to have mapped a network drive. And so it's just going to be your Z drive or something like that. So now all we need to do is right click on the folder. I'm actually going to choose 2019 because I did not carry over that quote unquote Lightroom one. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say update folder location right here. And so now, as you can see, it is currently looking at them on the actual external drive. But instead, we want to tell it to actually look at the photography folder, raw files 2019. I would highly recommend making sure that this 2019 matches the same name right there. It tends to work best if you do it like that. And so now we're just going to say choose. And we can see that now glyph, that external drive, has nothing in it. And so we could actually just remove it completely if we wanted to, because it's no longer got anything. Because now all of our files are stored on photography, which is stored on the NAS. And you can see everything has just copied on over, and Lightroom is going to continue to work exactly as you would expect it to. Because now whenever it's referencing a RAW file, it is just referencing it on the NAS rather than on a local drive. And so that is how you migrate your catalog to starting to work on the NAS. All right, so now I want to go over an explanation on the import process. And to do this, I'm basically just going to re-import this 29 folder. So I'm just going to say the 29th folder, say it's not part of the catalog anymore, so I'm just going to remove it. And I'm also going to delete that folder off the actual NAS. All right, so now that that's removed, we can go ahead and go over the process of importing files. So I'm going to click on import, and I'm just going to go to that source where I've got the 29 folder still on the external hard drive. This would be your camera SD card, however you're normally importing. And what you're going to want to do is either copy as DNG or do a copy. That's pretty much what I always do. I like to do a copy as DNG because it's got metadata checksums, but totally up to you. The copy as DNG does take a while. And so now I'm going to talk through the two different workflows. The workflow we're going to start with is the one where it's most simple. Your RAW files are always on the NAS. So that's the only place they live. It's very simple, but can be a bit slower, especially if you're editing over Wi-Fi instead of a wired connection. And so the way we're going to do this is we're going to have selected our files to import from our camera's SD card, and we are going to choose where to put them. The important pieces is going to be the destination section. We're going to select organize by date and the date format of year, month, day. Highly recommend doing that for keeping everything organized. Now we're going to select the destination as the photography, or on Windows it would be a drive letter. And we're going to go into RAW files. And so all I had to do was select RAW files, and it said, okay, I'm going to create a folder that's 2019, it already exists, 0629. And so we can see right here the preview of exactly how it's going to lay them out. And it's just going to keep us very organized. And so this way, they're going to be added directly into the server. So I'm just going to go ahead and for speed, just choose a few of these and hit import. So it is importing them on in. And now we can see that it has automatically just added them right here. We can edit them like we would normally, building the one-to-one previews, all that good stuff. So this is the workflow that is going to be a bit slower because the files are actually always on the NAS. So right now I'm over Wi-Fi, so if you look, when I'm editing stuff, it can take a little while to actually apply some changes. So you can see sometimes it takes a second. That's actually pretty good. It saved it pretty well. But it depends, especially if you've got thousands and thousands of photos you're importing, that process may be a bit slower. What we can do instead we can import and work with our current month or current year, depending on how much data you've got on the local hard drive of the computer. And so this is where it's very important to stay organized. And so I'm going to go over that workflow now. And so to do this, the important thing is to stay organized and know where everything is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the external drive. So I'm going to pretend like my external drive is where I'm working on the local files. It's a very fast external drive. Or you could also go into your pictures folder on your computer. That's where Lightroom tends to stick things. I would recommend putting it next to wherever you've saved off your catalog. So my catalog is over here. And this right here is where my catalog is stored. So to do that, I'm going to create a new folder right here that's going to be called local raw files. However you'd like to do that. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start importing my local files in here. And we can say that we're going to keep the past 3 months on our local drive. And then after that, it's going to be moved over. So I'm going to show that workflow here. So the important thing to do is to create a folder called local raw files. That's just the easiest way to keep everything organized next to your Lightroom catalog, wherever that is. And so we've done that. And now we can go back into Lightroom and let's go ahead and import some photos. what I'm going to do to keep this a little bit cleaner is I'm actually going to delete the actual import that I just did there. That was the demonstration. And we're going to show how you would import it otherwise. So I just deleted them. That is just because we're doing a demonstration here. So now let's say we've come back from a trip and we plug in our camera SD card. Let's go ahead and go through that process. Note, this process actually works as well if you're editing remotely. So I'm going to hit import, and I'm going to pretend like that external hard drive is my camera SD card. And I'm going to just select a few folders. And now you can see it's remembered, hey, you last time imported into raw files. Okay, but we don't want to do that. Instead, we want to select that local raw files, so that way the raw files are stored locally. And so now, because it's so much faster, because I'm on a local very fast NVMe SSD, I'm going to check a lot of them here. And instead of putting them there, I'm going to navigate to where my Lightroom catalog is and select local raw files. And so you can see it's created the exact same workflow. Note, when you're doing this, you want to make sure your date format is year, month, day, all different folders, because you want to be able to copy these folders around and keep them organized. That's going to be the most important thing here. So I'm going to select that, and you can see I've got these tiers. So what this allows me to do is I can choose day by day exactly what folder to move, though more likely than not, I would be moving month by month. But I'm going to show it day by day. And then if you're doing month by month, you can follow the exact same thing. Just choose the month folder instead of the day folder. And you can even do it year by year, following the exact same process. So I've selected local raw files on that drive that is going to be where my catalog is stored. I'm going to hit import. And so now we're going to see that it has brought over two separate folders. We now have this local raw files and the raw files. So this is where you can tell exactly where everything is, and you'll notice that everything runs a lot quicker over here. Building previews, one-to-one stuff, all of it runs a lot quicker because we are accessing them directly on the local SSD rather than having to go to the NAS. Specifically because right now we're over Wi-Fi. All right, so now we're going to do all of our great edits. We're going to go in, we're going to do everything we want to do, yada, 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 whatever you want to do, right? Looks absolutely phenomenal. So we now can say, all right, that project is done. We are good. It is the end of the month. However you want to start doing it, or maybe it's whenever you're running out of space. Let's start migrating and essentially archiving our most recent files. Instead of them having on the local drive, we're going to migrate them on to the NAS. And so now what we're going to want to do for that is we are going to want to go into Finder and do the exact same copy we did earlier. So we know that we've got this 29 folder. We want that in here. So what we could do is we could actually tell Lightroom to do it ourselves by dragging the 29 folder into the 06 folder. And this is actually going to move the files on disk. So that is option 1. So that is not a bad option, and probably what I would recommend most people do if they're doing small groups. But say you're moving a ton of files. This is where I like to do it very manually. I'm going to go in, I'm going to click on photography. And so right here, I've got my local raw files and my raw files. And I know that I am moving the 29 folder. So up here is that local raw files. And I know, all right, I'm done with 29, or I'm done with a month. Oh, I'm done with a year. However, I'm going to do it is I'm going to copy it over using Finder or Windows File Explorer. And I'm just going to let that copy finish. And so once again, this process, because I'm over Wi-Fi, is going to be much slower. Normally, you can expect to get about 120 megabytes per second. Right now, I'm probably getting 20. And so if you are doing this process, it's a great idea to buy a little dongle that hooks up your computer to the wired network. For you, it's probably just going to be plugging the adapter directly into your Wi-Fi router. It should have probably 4 ports in the back. The Synology is probably plugged into one of them. Just plug your computer directly into that. And that way, you're going to be copying over wired instead of Wi-Fi. So those are for people who are always on Wi-Fi. For everybody else, it's great. And so now this copy has finally gone ahead and finished. All right, and so the next steps are going to be pretty specific here. And this is exactly how I do it. So step one, make sure you've copied all of the raw files to the folder you want. Perfect, done. Next step is to tell Lightroom you've done that. So I'm going to go into Lightroom, just like we did at the start of this video, right click on it and update the folder location and say, okay, it's not on the local raw files. Now it is on photography, raw files, and go to 29. So we update the folder 29 and we found the folder 29 and we're going to hit choose. And they have all been copied on over. And so just like that, we can see that the folder is now over here, and it's a good idea to click into it and make sure there's no missing photos. So now we can see that Lightroom's no longer looking at this. So it's up to you how you want to clean this up. If you've got other folders in here, you've got your options. What I would probably do is say, okay, I'm just going to remove out that entire folder just because there's no folders left in there, but keep the local raw files in there just as a reminder as to what is local and what is not, because you'll probably have other raw files in there. So now, once we've done that, to make sure we're super organized, we know everything is off of that. Lightroom's not referencing any of those photos. So we can go back in to those local raw files and we deleted them out of Lightroom, and now we can delete them out of here. So now our only copy of the data is on there. And that is the process for basically archiving stuff. All right, and so now the last thing I need to go ahead and show and do, and this is really macOS only, is what happens if you open it up and the photography folder is not mounted yet. I have not yet mounted it, so let's go into Adobe Lightroom and we're going to see it's going to have some trouble figuring out where it is. We can see that this entire drive is missing. On Windows, that's almost never going to happen unless you're off of your home's Wi-Fi network, but on Mac this can happen, essentially whenever you log in. All you need to do is go in, click on the drive again, double click on it, and now you'll see it's mapped. And now when Lightroom refreshes here, it's going to find, hey, here are all those drives. Voila. It has refound everything, no missing photos, all good. That's all you have to do is click on it. And so that is pretty much it. Now, the last thing we're going to go ahead and set up is our backup. So the easiest thing to do is just go into Catalog Settings, Backup Catalog when Lightroom next exits, just to get to the Settings menu. And now we just get to choose our location. So we're going to tell it to go on that folder we set up. So we're going to navigate to the server and select Lightroom Backup and hit Backup. So now we've got the catalog in two different places. It's on the local drive and it's also on the file server. So that is what you really want to do. And that way you've got a duplicate catalog essentially. And so if your main drive fails, you've got a backup of the catalog on the server. And that's pretty much it. This is the basics of the overall workflow. And let me know if you have any questions down in the comments below. And for anything more in depth, I've also got a forum site that I'll leave a link to that we can really talk about photography workflows, specifically when it comes to Synology NAS. Check out the next videos in the series. They should be linked down below and hopefully in a playlist. And if you want to hire me for a project or set up your NAS for photography, I've got a link for that under the Hire Me section. All right, have a good one. Bye.